Reality television has a very specific food chain, and for years, Darcey Silva has existed near the very top of the 90-day ecosystem. Not the most sympathetic figure, not the most emotionally stable presence on screen, but undeniably, unmistakably, one of the most central gravitational forces this franchise has ever produced. The pull of Darcy-related content has kept this entire machine running through cast changes, format reinventions, and a global pandemic that shut down production across the industry. She is the show in many ways. Her name is the one casual viewers say when someone asks them if they watch 90 Day. Her drama is the drama the algorithm rewards. Her tears, her heartbreaks, her twin-powered redemption arc all feed the beast in a way very few reality personalities can sustain across multiple years and multiple spin-offs. Which is exactly why what just happened is so extraordinary. And I mean that word precisely. Extraordinary. Beyond what this franchise normally produces. Because someone inside her own universe, someone who signed the same contracts, survived the same production process, smiled in the same reunion photos, decided that enough was enough. And they did not whisper it into a fan account DM. They did not hint at it through a vague, cryptic Instagram story that disappears in 24 hours. They detonated it, publicly, messily, in a way that TLC's communications team is reportedly handling with the energy of people trying to cap a burst pipe with their bare hands. If you are new to this channel, welcome. Hit that like button right now and subscribe, because we cover the 90-day universe every single week at a level of depth that the mainstream entertainment press simply does not have the time or the context to match. This is the channel where the real conversations happen. And what we are about to get into today is one of the most significant internal fractures this franchise has ever produced. So stay with me, because this story has layers. Let's start at the beginning. Not the dramatic beginning, the actual beginning. Because to understand why this castmate went public, why they chose this moment, why the response from the network has been so conspicuously careful, you have to understand the environment that created the tension in the first place. When you are the face of a franchise, when your name is the shorthand, when your drama drives the weekly conversation, when your spinoff gets its own spinoff, you accumulate something that has nothing to do with talent or work ethic or how charming you are in a confessional camera. You accumulate resentment. Slow, patient, building resentment from the people who worked just as hard, sacrificed just as much personal privacy, handed over just as much of their authentic lives to cameras and producers and editing bays, and received a fraction of the spotlight in return. These are people who did the work. People who showed up, delivered drama, gave the producers what they needed, went home and dealt with the public fallout of being edited into a version of themselves that wasn't entirely accurate, and then watched someone else's name trend on Twitter every single week. Those people smile at reunions. They post supportive comments on each other's content. They play the game because the game still has something to offer them, and they wait. The waiting, apparently, is over. Now, here's where this story gets genuinely complicated in a way that separates it from the usual 90-day drama cycle. And I need you to pay close attention here, because this distinction matters more than anything else I am going to say today. This is not an outsider making accusations. This is not a former producer with an axe to grind. This is not a fan account that got lucky with a source. This is a fellow cast member, someone who has been through the exact same production pipeline, someone who has read the same contracts, been on the same sets, been shaped by the same editorial decisions, and faced the same public judgment that comes with putting your relationship on national television. That matters enormously. Because one of the most reliable defenses available to public figures, especially reality TV personalities, is the credibility gap. The idea that critics are operating from the outside, that they don't have access to the full picture, that they're interpreting things they didn't personally witness. Darcy has used this defense before. Most public figures do. When the criticism gets uncomfortable, you lean on the idea that the person criticizing you simply wasn't there. I don't know what really happened. Doesn't have the context. This castmate was there. Has the context. And the receipts to match. That changes the entire dynamic of this conflict, because you cannot dismiss someone with equivalent proximity to the truth. You cannot out information someone who is in the same room. You cannot call someone an outsider when they are, by definition, an insider. The credibility gap that usually gives public figures room to breathe does not exist in a castmate war. And whoever is managing Darcy's public narrative right now knows that. Which is why, if you have been watching her social media this week, you have noticed something interesting. The volume has actually gone down, not up. The posting frequency has shifted. The engagement with comments has become more curated. Something is being managed. Let me talk about the financial dimension of this, because this is where TLC's panic becomes most understandable and most revealing. The 90-Day franchise is not just a television show. It is a content ecosystem that generates value across multiple platforms simultaneously. There is the linear cable audience. There is the streaming component. There are the spin-offs, the digital exclusives, the social content, the merchandise, the personal appearances, the podcast deals that flow downstream from the franchise's visibility. All of that value, every dollar of it, depends on the franchise being perceived as a functional, if chaotic, operation. Chaotic is fine. The 90-Day franchise runs on chaos. Chaotic is the product. What advertisers and streaming partners cannot absorb, what makes the bean counters genuinely nervous, is internally fractured. There is a difference between the chaos of dramatic relationships and the chaos of talent at war with each other in mainstream media. One is entertaining. The other raises questions. Questions about the production environment. Questions about how talent is treated. Questions about whether the network is managing its people responsibly. Those questions, once asked loudly enough in the right places, have a way of changing conversations in rooms where streaming deals and advertising rates get discussed. TLC needs this contained, and it is not currently contained. And that is not an observation, that is a measurable fact based on what has already happened publicly and where it has already landed. Here's what I want you to understand about the specific moment that transformed this from a social media conflict into something the industry is actually watching. Because there is a moment in every public dispute where it crosses a line, where it moves from being a story that fans and T accounts cover to being a story that entertainment journalists with editors and fact checkers cover. Those are fundamentally different things. Fan content and T channels, and I say this with full awareness that this channel is operated with a different standard of accountability than mainstream journalism. We report what we see, what we're told, what the evidence suggests. A journalist at a publication with legal oversight operates with a different framework entirely. The castmate in question gave an interview, not to a fan account, not to a gossip aggregator, to a publication with mainstream readership and editorial standards. In that interview, they made specific, named, verifiable allegations about their experience within this franchise that directly implicated the production environment, the same production environment that Darcy has publicly praised on multiple occasions across multiple appearances. They described specific incidents, they identified specific patterns, and they connected specific dots between the way the show is produced and the outcomes for the people who participate in it. Outcomes that are, at minimum, worth examining seriously. When that interview was being prepared for publication, the fact-checker made calls to people who work at the network, calls to people with direct knowledge of the incidents being described. That is the moment the story changed categories. That is the moment it stopped being manageable through a well-timed Instagram post or a carefully worded statement from a publicist. Once the calls are being made, once the network is being asked for official comment on specific allegations from a mainstream outlet, you are in a different situation entirely. Now, I want to be careful here, and I want to be transparent with you about why, because I think this channel's credibility depends on me being straight with you about the lines I'm working with. I am not going to tell you things I cannot verify. I am not going to name the castmate definitively when I am working from sources rather than confirmed public statements. What I can tell you is that the outline of this story, the interview, the allegations, the network's involvement, and the fact-checking process is being discussed in places that are significantly more official than our corner of the internet. This is real. This is being tracked. And the downstream consequences for the franchise and for Darcy's position within it are still being determined in real time. Let me pivot because I think there is something that gets missed in coverage like this when it focuses exclusively on the drama itself and not on the person at the center of it. I want to talk about Darcy's behavioral pattern in conflict situations. Not to be unkind, because I think understanding how she typically responds is actually the most useful thing I can offer you right now for making sense of how this plays out. When Darcy faces a direct challenge, and we have seen this play out multiple times across multiple seasons, her first move is almost never to engage substantively with the substance of the challenge. She moves emotionally before she moves analytically. She personalizes professional disputes in a way that sometimes serves her because it generates sympathy and connection with her audience, and sometimes doesn't because it allows the original criticism to sit unanswered while the conversation moves to her feelings about it rather than the facts behind it. She rallies her support base loudly and publicly, often before she has fully processed what she is actually responding to. In a dispute with a former partner, this produces compelling television. It is actually a strength in that context. The emotional immediacy, the willingness to be completely exposed on camera. In a dispute with a fellow professional who has their own platform, their own media relationships, and their own audience who has been primed over time to trust them, it produces a content war that neither side can fully control, and that the network ultimately loses patience with faster than either party expects. Darcy has fought public battles before. She has won some of them, at least in terms of public perception. She has recovered from situations that looked unrecoverable. The audience has a real and genuine affection for her that should not be underestimated. But she has never fought a castmate with this level of media access and this level of specific documented grievance. This is genuinely new terrain. And the footing is not stable. Watch for what I am going to call the Unity post. If it hasn't appeared by the time you are watching this video, it is coming. I have watched enough of these cycles to know the playbook with some precision. It will be a carefully composed photo, good lighting, probably natural, an empowerment quote overlaid on it, something about staying focused on blessings, something about not letting other people's energy occupy your space, something that gestures toward a peace that the situation has not actually produced. And the response will divide her audience perfectly in half, and both halves will be simultaneously right about something. The half that says, Queen energy, stay unbothered, you do not owe anyone a response. They are right that the post is performing a kind of self-possession that her base finds reassuring and genuine. The half that says, this is not a response, this is a redirect, this is a change of subject, they are also right, because it is both things at once. It is performing unbothered while being very bothered. It is moving the conversational terrain from what the castmate said, which was specific and evidence-based, to how Darcy feels about it, which is emotional and, by its nature, unverifiable. Moving from fact to feeling is the oldest defensive maneuver in the reality television playbook. It works on some audiences and it does not work on others. And right now, she needs it to work on the audience that is watching the mainstream coverage, not just her core supporters. And here is the moral core of this conflict, and I think this is the part that makes people genuinely uncomfortable in a way that goes beyond typical reality TV gossip. This is not just about what happened between two cast members. This is about the gap between the values that Darcey Silva performs publicly and the values that a person with equivalent inside knowledge is now publicly alleging were actually in operation. She talks about sisterhood. She uses that word with real fluency and real frequency. Sisterhood, support, women lifting women, lifting each other up. She says these things in captions, in interviews, in reunion confessionals, with the ease of someone who has said them so many times, they have become a kind of personal brand language, almost reflexive. And there is a version of this where that language is completely genuine, where it reflects something she actually believes and tries to act on. That version of events deserves to be on the table. But the person who just gave that interview to a mainstream publication is also a woman, also a castmate, also someone who shared professional space with her, who was part of the same franchise community, who was theoretically covered by the umbrella of that sisterhood language. The allegation, and I want to be precise, this is an allegation, it is contested, I am not delivering a verdict, that the sisterhood has terms and conditions that were not disclosed up front, that it applies selectively, that the people who receive the benefit of it are the people who are useful to the narrative Darcy is building at any given moment, and that usefulness has an expiration date. If that allegation is accurate, and again, we are in the stage where it is alleged, not established, then the gap between the performance and the reality is significant. Not just in terms of hypocrisy, which is almost universal in public life, and which audiences have demonstrated an enormous capacity to forgive, but in terms of what it means for someone whose primary public identity is built on emotional authenticity. The whole proposition of Darcey Silva as a television personality is that what you see is what you get. The vulnerability is real. The love is real. The pain is real. If a fellow insider is credibly alleging that a significant portion of the sisterhood performance is exactly that, a performance, then the foundational proposition of her public identity is what is being challenged. Not just her reputation, her brand thesis. That is a fundamentally different kind of attack than anything she has weathered before. I want to spend a moment on the industry isolation dynamic, because I think this is the most underreported consequence of a high-profile castmate conflict, and it is the one that will matter most for Darcy's long-term position in the franchise. When two cast members go to war publicly, the other cast members go quiet. This is not cowardice, it is rational self-interest. Nobody wants to be on the record picking a side in a dispute that is still in progress, that has legal dimensions, and that the network is visibly managing. So the people who might have been natural supporters, who might have posted the kind of public loyalty content that shifts perception, they go silent. They watch from a safe distance. They like neither post, they comment on nothing. That silence looks like neutrality. It is actually closer to abandonment in a moment where solidarity would have been meaningful. And then there is the network dimension, the production staff, the executives, the people who genuinely like Darcy personally. And there are people who genuinely like Darcy personally. This franchise does not run on contempt, for its talent cannot protect her professionally from a story that has already reached a mainstream publication. Their affection for her is real. Their power to contain a story that is already in the hands of a journalist with an editor and a deadline is effectively zero. The network communicates through lawyers, through publicists, through carefully worded statements that say nothing and establish everything. That is not supported. That is liability management wearing the costume of support. And the castmate, having already absorbed the professional risk of speaking publicly, having already crossed the point of no return by giving that interview, has nothing left to lose. No incentive to pull back, no reason to soften the message. When you have already made the most dangerous move available to you and survived the initial impact, you're operating from a position of peculiar freedom. You cannot be threatened with consequences you have already accepted, and that freedom is dangerous in ways that are very difficult to counter-program. That is where we are right now, and I want to be honest with you. This story is still developing. The mainstream coverage is still being written. The network's response is still being formulated. Darcy's next move has not yet been made. Or, if it has been made, it has not yet been revealed. What we are doing right now is watching a situation in real time that has passed the point of containment and has not yet reached the point of resolution. What comes next is what I want to get into in the second part of this video. Because the end game of a situation like this, the way it tends to resolve, and the specific implications for Darcy's place in the 90-day universe going forward are not things I want to rush through. They deserve the same level of attention we have given to everything that came before. So stay right there. Part 2 is coming immediately, and the final chapter of this story is the one that will genuinely surprise you. And what comes next is the part of the story that most people covering this situation are either not seeing yet or are not willing to say out loud. Let's talk about the point of no return. Because in every public conflict, every scandal, every castmate war, every institutional fracture, there is a specific moment where the situation crosses from manageable to uncontainable. And identifying that moment is not just interesting analysis. It is the key to understanding what the available options actually are from this point forward. Because once you know where the point of no return is, you know what strategies can still work and which ones are already dead on arrival. The point of no return in this situation is the mainstream publication. I want you to really sit with what that means in practical terms. Fan accounts are one thing. T-channels, and again, I say this with complete self-awareness, are one thing. We operate in a specific ecosystem with a specific audience that is already invested in this franchise, already primed to engage with this content, already familiar with the players. That ecosystem is powerful in its own right. It shapes how the core fan base perceives events. It creates the narrative pressure that eventually forces public responses. But it is a contained ecosystem. The people inside it already know who Darcey Silva is. A mainstream publication is a different instrument entirely. When a journalist at a publication with general readership writes about a reality TV conflict, they are not writing for the core fan base. They are writing for people who might have heard of 90 Day Fiancé but couldn't name 3 cast members. They are writing for entertainment editors at other outlets who will pick up the story and run their own angles. They are writing for the kind of coverage that ends up in the search results when someone Googles a name for the first time. They are, in a very real sense, writing the public record. And the public record, once written, is extraordinarily difficult to revise. This is what TLC understands, that perhaps even the castmate involved fully understands. When you hand a fully loaded story to a journalist at a real publication, you are not just creating a news cycle. You are creating a document, a reference point, something that future journalists will cite when they write their own pieces, something that becomes the established baseline for how this conflict is understood by anyone who encounters it for the first time 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now. Darcy has survived bad press cycles before. She has survived edited villain moments. She has survived public breakups that played out across multiple platforms. She has survived the kind of social media pile-ons that would have ended the public careers of people with smaller fan bases and less genuine personality. Her resilience in that specific kind of storm is genuinely remarkable and genuinely earned. She has something real with her audience that cannot be manufactured. The connection is authentic in ways that matter. But what she has not survived before, because she has not faced it before, is a mainstream outlet publishing a piece in which a fellow insider makes specific, named, verifiable allegations that sit in the public record permanently and get cited every time a journalist covers her going forward. That is a different kind of weather, and the umbrella she has used before does not cover this particular storm. Let me tell you what the endgame scenarios look like from here, because I think laying them out clearly is more useful than vague speculation about what might happen. There are essentially 3 trajectories the situation can take, and understanding each of them tells you something important about what the franchise is actually dealing with. The first trajectory is managed de-escalation. This is the outcome TLC is almost certainly working hardest toward right now. In managed de-escalation, both parties are brought to the table, usually through intermediaries, usually through the kind of quiet, off-camera conversation that never gets documented, and reaches some version of an understanding. Not a resolution, not a genuine peace, an understanding. A mutual agreement to stop adding fuel to the fire in exchange for something that meets both parties' needs. For the castmate, that something might be an acknowledgement, a platform adjustment, a guarantee about how future content gets handled. For Darcy, it is the removal of active pressure from someone who currently has nothing left to lose. Managed de-escalation is the outcome that serves the network most cleanly. It allows the franchise to move forward without carrying this conflict as a permanent narrative weight. It gives both parties a version of a win they can each frame however they need to for their respective audiences. And it usually involves a level of behind-the-scenes maneuvering that the public never fully sees, which is why, if it happens, you will probably notice it more from what stops being said than from any explicit statement. The second trajectory is escalation to full fracture. This is the outcome where the managed de-escalation fails, where one or both parties cannot or will not accept the terms of any workable understanding, and the conflict continues to generate public content. More interviews, more social posts, more T-channel coverage feeding into mainstream coverage, feeding back into more interviews. A cycle that the network watches with increasing alarm and decreasing capacity to manage. In this trajectory, one of 2 things eventually happens. Either the network makes a decision about which party is more valuable to the franchise's future and takes structural steps, contractual, production level, platform level steps to signal that decision clearly. Or both parties exhaust themselves and their audiences simultaneously, and the conflict collapses from fatigue rather than resolution. Neither version of full fracture is good for Darcy. In the first version, she is betting that the network's calculation comes out in her favor, which, historically, it probably should, given her significance to the franchise's identity. But that bet becomes significantly more complicated when the conflict has already generated mainstream coverage with specific allegations attached to it. Networks make talent decisions partly based on value and partly based on liability. A talent who is generating liability at the level of documented mainstream allegations is a different calculation than a talent who is simply unpopular with some portion of the audience. In the second version, mutual exhaustion, she survives, technically, but the conflict leaves marks on how the press covers her that do not simply disappear when the active fighting stops. The third trajectory is the one that nobody in the 90-day universe wants to talk about yet, but that I think this channel owes you the honesty of naming. And that is meaningful institutional change driven by the castmates' allegations. If the specific incidents described in that interview are substantiated, if the journalist's fact-checking process produced corroborating sources, if the calls to the network produced either confirmation or conspicuously non-denial denials, if other voices begin to emerge with similar accounts, then the story stops being about Darcy and the castmate specifically. It becomes a story about the franchise, about the production environment, about the systemic experience of being a cast member on 90-day programming. That is a story with implications that go far beyond any individual conflict between any two personalities. We have seen this pattern play out in other reality franchises. We have watched conflicts that started as personal disputes between cast members become the catalyst for broader conversations about production ethics, about how talent is recruited and managed and discarded, about what the human cost of this content actually looks like behind the entertaining surface. Those conversations, once started at volume, are very difficult to stop. And they change the franchise landscape in ways that individual cast members have very little control over. I am not saying that is where this goes. I am saying that the castmates' decision to go to a mainstream publication with specific allegations rather than keeping the conflict in the ecosystem where it is manageable opens the door to that trajectory in a way it was not open before. And doors that open in this industry have a way of staying open longer than anyone involved initially intends. Now I want to come back to Darcy specifically, because I think there is a version of this analysis that is so focused on the institutional and professional dimensions that it loses sight of the human being at the center of it. And I think that would be a mistake both analytically and frankly, ethically. Because underneath all of the brand language and the franchise mechanics and the network strategy is a person who built something genuinely difficult to build. A public identity with real emotional resonance. A fan base with real loyalty. A presence in this entertainment space that was not handed to her. It was constructed painstakingly through years of being willing to be vulnerable on camera in ways that most people would find unbearable. The resilience required to do what Darcey Silva has done in this franchise is real. the capacity to return season after season after public heartbreak and public criticism, and the kind of social media commentary that is genuinely cruel in ways that the people writing it do not fully account for, is not nothing. That is something. And I think the analysis of this conflict is incomplete if it does not hold that alongside everything else. What I believe, and I want to be clear about this, is my read, not established fact, is that the castmates' decision to go public is not primarily about destroying Darcy. Public scorched earth campaigns motivated purely by destruction tend to look different from what we are seeing here. What I am seeing looks more like someone who reached a limit, who decided that the cost of continuing to operate within the unspoken agreements of the franchise ecosystem, the smile at reunions, the supportive tags, the patient silence, had finally exceeded the benefit. And who made the calculation that speaking publicly, with evidence, to a credible outlet was the only move that would actually be heard? That is a human decision, made by a human being in a difficult situation. It is also a decision with significant collateral impact on another human being. Both of those things are true simultaneously, and both deserve to be in the frame. What Darcy does next is the actual next move, not the unity post, not the redirect to feelings, but the substantive response to what has been specifically alleged will tell us more about where she is in her own understanding of this situation than anything she has done publicly in years. Because the options available to her are genuinely limited in a way they have not been before. Ignoring it is not viable when it has mainstream coverage attached. Denying it without specifics is not viable when the allegations are specific. Attacking the castmate's credibility is not viable when the castmate has equivalent insider standing and has given evidence to a publication with fact checkers. The playbook she has used before does not fully apply here. The option that is available, and that I think is actually the most strategically sound and personally honest path she has, regardless of what the eventual media advice says, is to engage with the substance. Not to capitulate. Not to admit to things she does not believe she did. But to meet specific allegations with specific responses. To demonstrate that she understands what is being said about her and has something substantive to say about it, rather than performing above-it-all energy that the evidence trail directly contradicts. Whether she takes that path is a genuinely open question. Her track record in conflict suggests she will find it difficult. Engaging substantively with an allegation requires sitting inside the discomfort of the allegation long enough to understand it clearly before responding. And that is not a comfortable process for anyone, least of all someone who processes conflict emotionally first and analytically second. But here's the thing I want you to hold on to as this story continues to develop. The audience for 90 Day Fiancé, the real audience, the one that has been watching this franchise across all of its iterations for years, is significantly more sophisticated than it sometimes gets credit for. This is not an audience that simply consumes drama uncritically. It is an audience that has watched enough seasons, enough reunion specials, enough behind-the-scenes content to have developed real intuition about when something is genuine and when something is performed. When accountability is real and when it is theater. When an apology is an apology and when an apology is a rebranding exercise. That audience is watching this situation with the same sophisticated attention it has brought to everything else. And the verdict that the audience delivers, not this week, not while the conflict is at its peak, but over the months that follow, will be more important than any single interview, any single Instagram post, any single network statement, because that audience is ultimately the franchise. Without their continued investment, none of the rest of it, the streaming deals, the advertising rates, the spin-off negotiations, means anything. I think the 90-day franchise survives this. The franchise has survived things that looked equally unrecoverable at the time. The infrastructure is strong, the audience is loyal, and the content machine has demonstrated an ability to absorb conflict and convert it into programming that nobody in the conventional entertainment industry would have predicted was possible. The franchise will be fine. What is genuinely uncertain is whether Darcey Silva's specific position within the franchise, the level of centrality she has held, the gravitational significance she has had to the content ecosystem, survives it in the same form. That is not a certainty in either direction. She has survived before and has assets that should not be underestimated, but she is operating in new terrain with a different kind of opponent and a public record that now includes documented allegations from a credible source. The calculation is different. Here is what I know for certain, because it is already true regardless of how any of the remaining scenarios play out. This conflict has changed the conversation around the franchise. It has introduced questions about production ethics, about how talent is treated, about what happens behind the camera that does not make it into the edit, that do not go away just because the immediate conflict cools. Those questions are now on the public record, attached to a mainstream outlet, and available to be picked up by any journalist who decides the story is worth pursuing further. The entertainment press does not have a morality clause. It does not have a stake in any particular version of events. It has deadlines and editors and readers who are increasingly interested in what the reality television industry actually looks like from the inside. And the castmate just handed them a door that was previously closed. What comes through that door? What additional voices it invites? What additional scrutiny it generates? What the full shape of the story looks like when all of the reporting is complete is the thing this channel will be watching most closely over the coming weeks. Because that is the part of the story that matters most. Not the social media posts, not the Unity Energy redirect, not even the network's official statement when it eventually comes. The thing that matters is what the full story looks like when people with the time and the resources to report it properly have done their work. And when that picture is clearer, you will hear about it here first. Because that is what this channel is for. The 90-day universe is vast, and it is complicated, and it is full of people making genuinely difficult decisions under circumstances that the entertainment they produce does not always fully represent. Covering it honestly means holding all of that complexity at once, the entertainment and the ethics, the drama and the humanity, the institutional mechanics, and the individual people caught inside them. This story is not finished. It is, if anything, just entering its most significant phase. The mainstream press has been handed the keys. The network is in reactive mode. The castmate has nothing left to lose. And Darcey Silva, resilient, complicated, genuinely significant to this franchise's history, is navigating terrain she has never navigated before, with tools that were designed for different battles. We will be here every step of the way, watching carefully, reporting honestly, not for clicks, though we will absolutely take them, but because this franchise and the people in it deserve coverage that treats them as complex human beings operating inside a complicated industry, rather than content units to be processed and discarded. That is the promise of this channel. That is what the tell-all tapes is actually for. If this kind of coverage is what you came here for, if you want the analysis that goes deeper than the surface drama, that connects the institutional dots, that treats you like an intelligent adult who can handle nuance and complexity, then you need to be subscribed right now. Hit that subscribe button, hit the bell so you do not miss anything. And if this video gave you something worth thinking about, hit that like button, because it tells the algorithm that this kind of serious, substantive coverage of the 90-day universe is what the audience actually wants. Share this video with one person in your life who watches this franchise and deserves a better conversation about it than the comment sections usually produce. Because the conversation this story deserves is exactly what we built this channel to have. We are here every single week. The tell-all tapes does not miss, and neither, it turns out, does the mainstream press when someone hands them a fully loaded story with named sources and a fact checker on speed dial. Stay watching, stay skeptical, stay subscribed, because the next chapter of this story is coming, and when it does, this is exactly where you want to be.